My name is Ferenc Takó, Head of Director's Cabinet International Strategy Office, and I will be the host of today's event. I would like to welcome everyone to the second lecture of the popular scientific lecture series titled What's New in Science. In this series, we are organizing lectures held by professors from ELTE, and the topics of the lectures will all revolve around science. The lectures are not only for the practitioners of the specific professional field, but all citizens and international alumni of ELTE. This year's lecture display the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on education and learning. The title of today's lecture is Solidarity in Times of a Pandemic, the Results of an Online Survey in Hungary. The session is going to be held by Dr. Domonkos Sik, Associate Professor of Sociology at the Faculty of Social Sciences of ELTE. Professor Sik has been a faculty member for the last 7 years. He is a lecturer at the Institute of Sociology, Department of Social Theory, and in the Probléma Megoldó Rendszerek Kutatócsoport research group of problem-solving systems. His research deals with various topics in critical theory, including phenomenology of mental disorders and late modernity. His studies have appeared in journals such as the Sociological Review and the European Journal of Social Theory. He has written several monographs, including Radicalism and Indifference and A szenvedés határállapotai, Lasting Suffering. The What's New in Science lecture series is one of the many events in English that ELTE is planning for everyone interested in such lectures, and specifically for international alumni. These series are part of the ELTE Alumni Academy, organized by the International Alumni Chapter. Make sure to stay up to date with the upcoming events through the ELTE website and the alumni website of the university, alumni.elte.hu, where you can also join the ELTE alumni community. We would like to thank the ELTE Alumni Center, the ELTE Alumni Organization, and ELTE Alumni Foundation for their continuous support on launching the ELTE Alumni Academy. So I would like to give the floor, or so to speak, the screen at this point to Professor Sik. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Before I start, I would like to have a quick feedback if I can be heard and the screen is okay. Gergő or Ferenc?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So, welcome, everyone. It is a great honor to be here, not just because I'm also an alumni of ELTE, but also because I think that these sort of events are really important, and by that I mean those kind of events when scientific issues, especially sociological issues or social scientific issues, are discussed in front of a wider public sphere, and it's because I think these questions are quite relevant for not just those who are working as sociologists or in any of the related social scientific field, but I think these issues concerns all of us. This is about understanding our own society, understanding our own possibilities, and understanding all those difficulties which are ahead of us. So I'm really glad for that reason as well to having been invited to this series. And the topic I brought today is based on a research which we are conducting together with several colleagues, and this particular piece is based on a paper which we've been working together with Ildikó Zakariás, a colleague of mine. So that's also something which I wanted to highlight at the beginning of the presentation. Let's begin. First, if we would like to understand the stakes of this question, I thought that the best way to do it is to reflect a little bit on the broad interdisciplinary context of the notion of solidarity. It's particularly important because solidarity is one of those concepts which is at the crossroads of many disciplines. It's not just sociology which deals with solidarity, obviously. For political science, for moral philosophy, or for social policy studies, this is also a key concept. So let's have a little look at these. What are these different dimensions of solidarity which come to the picture? From a sociological perspective, and of course I will elaborate on this the most, solidarity is a concept which dates back to the beginning of the discipline. It is related to the very fundamental level of social integration, which is a key term in sociology. What is social integration? Social integration is basically the sum of those forces which are responsible for maintaining social units of every size. And although this may sound a little bit abstract at first sight, but if you think about it from a more practical perspective, you may think about it this way, that if you are entering into an interaction with anyone else, with just a complete stranger, or with someone we are familiar with, there are so many assumptions that we are relying on. We are relying on normative assumptions. We are relying on expectations of roles. We are relying on instrumental goals with the other. And that is what social integration is about. The question of social integration is about what are these forces which enable us to enter these interactions or to form larger social units such as organizations, families, relationships, friendships, or the whole society. And in this sense, social integration relies on many mechanisms, and one of these mechanisms is solidarity. Solidarity is basically refers to those ties, those relationships where there are reliable expectations of supporting each other. And this includes expectations about deservingness, who deserves support. These include expectations about responsibilities, whose responsibility is it to provide support. And these include also the limitations of support. Who are excluded from certain types of support? What are the adequate forms of providing support? All these questions are included in the sociological question of solidarity, and we are going to discuss these a little bit more when it comes to talking about the empirical research itself. But this is not the only dimension of solidarity. From a moral philosophical point of view, it is obvious that solidarity has something to do with our moral sentiments or moral decisions. From a Kantian perspective, there is an ongoing debate still in contemporary moral philosophy whether the solidarity should be included into the categorical imperative, that is the basic set of of moral principles, or should it be treated rather as some form of complementary or consequence of these imperatives? I would not like to go into the details of these debates. I just would like to highlight that moral philosophy is also very interested, and a lot of reflections are given on solidarity within that field as well. Obviously, solidarity, even if we usually think of it as something which is based on empathic or sympathetic emotions, it is not just about this sort of positive relations to the others. And here comes the political dimension of solidarity to the picture. Solidarity is usually not an all-inclusive phenomenon. We are solidar with certain groups or certain dimensions of the layers of the society, which means that it is implying exclusion along with inclusion. And in this sense, solidarity is always having its political dimension. And by that I mean that it's always having its possibly conflictual dimension. Certain groups which are forming solidarity groups in the society may fight for their mutual interests as opposed to other groups in the society. Whether the groups can be organized into actors capable of collective action or not, that may depend largely on the integral solidarity ties within that certain groups. And that is what I mean by the political aspect of the solidarity. And of course, in contemporary societies, solidarity is very much the question of state social policies, the social policies of redistribution. That is probably the macro level of solidarity, and of course it is interrelated with the sociological, the moral, and the political dimensions. But I thought that it should be emphasized that solidarity is not just about the everyday interactions, the community level of the social world. It is also very much about the system level of the social world, which is integrated by legal texts. All right. So this is the broadest picture, and let's focus now a little bit on the sociological background of solidarity. As I mentioned it, the concept itself is dating back to the beginning of sociology, and here Emil Durkheim's name should be mentioned. His classic work is already discussing, and not just discussing, but discussing it in a central way, what is the modern characteristics of solidarity as opposed to the pre-modern one. And he basically argues that while in pre-modernity solidarity is based more or less on the similarity of the social actors, in modernity the challenge of modern society is to integrate actors who are not just different from each other, but who are actually functionally differentiated in their social roles. So they cannot be similar. That they cannot rely on those sentiments which are related to the similarity. So that is why he argues that in modernity there is a specific task of solidarity. It is not trivial how to ensure solidarity in modernity. This line of thought is continued by Habermas when he's talking about the reproduction of solidarity on the level of life world through those interactions and communicative processes which are responsible for creating those everyday realities which we are sharing as members of the same society. And solidarity is part of this tacit background knowledge. It is not something which we are necessarily reflecting on all the time. It is rather part of our unreflected, often unconscious basic presumptions. Solidarity, and that is a third aspect which I wanted to highlight, is also about providing rights, providing recognition, and expressing inclusive sentiments. So in this sense, and that is what Axel Honneth is talking about when he's talking about solidarity, solidarity is always a really important field where the self-esteem, that is the sense of worthiness in the eyes of the others, in the eye of the society, is being demonstrated. If someone belongs to a group which is excluded from solidarity ties, that will not just impact their life chances, but that will also mean that their self-worthiness is going to be, the sense of self-worthiness is going to be damaged as well. And one last dimension I wanted to emphasize, Bourdieu, is that solidarity is also a field of struggles. Actors are fighting for the right, fighting for the symbolic and material resources in the society. And this means that solidarity is also going to be contextualized, going to be embedded into these struggles. Okay, so these are the general concepts. Now, one last thing I want to emphasize here, and that is, what does it have to do with crises such as the pandemics? In pandemics, there is a particularly rare opportunity for social sciences to observe and analyze those values like deservingness, merit, responsibility, or those praxis, be them institutional or individual ones, which are related to solidarity. Why is this? As I said before, solidarity is usually works on the background level of our consciousness. We are not aware of our solidarity values most of the time. But in these times of crisis, such as the pandemic is, the values and the praxis are becoming questioned. They are becoming reconstituted, reconfigured, because there are new challenges arising. That is why we thought with my colleagues that it is an excellent opportunity to analyze this phenomenon now. Okay, now I've been mentioning what are the conceptual backgrounds. Let me talk a little bit about the specificities of solidarity in late modernity, that is our contemporary era. As a background, as a socio-historical background, I would refer to Robert Castell's excellent book on the transformation of the social question. In this book, he introduces how the pre-modern patterns of solidarity, which were based and rooted on the level of local communities, has been gradually transforming along with the processes of modernization, and finally resulted in the model of the state-governed social security systems, which social security systems are financed basically by the taxes from wages. And that is going to be really important for many reasons. One of the key reasons is that the key constituents of this system of social security has been facing several challenges in late modernity due to those structural transformations which occurred in the last 30 so years. The first of these challenges affects the ability of the state, or the ability of the nation state, to regulate the labor market and to regulate through these the financing of the social security system. Due to globalization and the emergence of global capitalism, no nation state is capable anymore alone to manage their own inner markets, which means that every nation state is going to be exposed to those global dynamics of the market, which are going to affect not just the prices on the local market, but more importantly, from the perspective of solidarity, the employment ratios. And in this sense, of course, there are quite a lot of typical reactions to this situation by the nation state. But what matters for us is that on a very fundamental level, the social security system is going to be challenged in late modernity due to globalization. Another important transformation, which can be called the emergence of a risk society, affects the status of expert knowledge. The modern systems of social security are expert systems, and by that I mean that they are not based anymore on any sort of transcendental knowledge or lay knowledge. They are based on scientific measurements of risks, probabilities, and adequate responses to this, adequate assurances related to these risks. That is risk assessment, basically. Now, in late modernity, these expert knowledge are also under siege from many directions. Let me just mention one quick buzzword, the post-truth world, and that is explains a lot how many difficulties these expert systems are facing nowadays. Another dimension of the late modern difficulties of solidarity are related to the transformation of the public sphere. Public sphere matters a lot when it comes to solidarity, mediated by the state's social security system. Why? Because the state is obviously a political entity which is controlled and which is formed and shaped by the public sphere. And in this sense, how the public sphere is changing, that affects the space of possibilities of the states themselves. So if there is such a drastic transformation such as the emergence of information society, completely resulting in the nivellating of public debate about basic values, for example, of solidarity, criteria of inclusion, exclusion, responsibilities, deservingness. If these debates are prevented by the infrastructural transformation of the public sphere, that is going to seriously affect the state solidarity as well. And one last thing which should be mentioned here is the process of individualization. Obviously, since Durkheim, it is a well-known balance that the more individualized society is, the less those traditional solidarity ties are present, which characterized pre-modern societies, and this affects obviously our societies as well. So, based on these different sorts of challenges and difficulties, I think it is not an overstatement to say that in late modernity, solidarity is becoming particularly contingent. It is going to be contingent because the main institutional actors which were responsible for solidarity in classical modernity, that is the state-governed social security system and the institutions subordinated to the system, they are facing fundamental challenges, and that is going to impact the functioning of solidarity as well. In this situation, the solidarity is facing the challenge of either it adapts to the new network constellation of late modernity, or it faces the risk of serious dysfunctionalities. Okay, Now let's turn our attention a little bit more specifically to our field, that is contemporary Hungary. What is known about contemporary Hungary solidarity structures from previous research? First, what needs to be emphasized is the transformation of the social security system. As I said, the social security system is something which is a key participant in contemporary contemporary solidarity ties. So the transformations of that level are having a central importance. And here the following tendencies needs to be highlighted. First of all, in the last 10 or so years, the model of welfare state has been replaced by the model of workfare state. And that is an important change. That is an important change on the level of the political values of the social security system. Why? Because that means that solidarity is already going to be subsumed under a principle, under a selective principle. Those are going to be included by the state in the solidarity ties who are participating in the labor market. And obviously that means that those who cannot for some reason participate in the labor market. By the way, those who are obviously also belonging to a group which is usually requiring and specifically requiring some form of aid because they are not participating in the labor market. Thus, they are not profiting from the division of the system of the division of labor. So, in this sense, those who are who are in the most needy situation have a higher chance to be excluded from the solidarity system. That's something which needs to be emphasized. Another important element of the recent trends in Hungarian social security system is the continuous decrease of the budget of social policy institutions, and that's not just in the 10 years. Unfortunately, that goes back for more previous times, but that is a really distressing tendency if you think about it this way, that the system which is responsible for supporting those who are requiring the most from state support is gradually underfinanced in the last decades. Another important aspect, another important dimension of the Hungarian context is the regulations. The regulations are somehow became quite hectic in the last decades, and by that I mean that there is no stable, predictable institutional environment on the level of the budget, on the level of the regulations themselves, on the level of the staff and these kind of things. There are so many insecurities and contingencies which make the work of the social policy expert, the work of the social workers more unpredictable, and in this sense burdens their work with the possibility of dysfunctionalities. Beside the social security system, on the everyday level of everyday support networks, there are also challenging tendencies to be mentioned. First, what needs to be emphasized is that obviously in the social historical context, we may say that the heritage of the state socialism has not been passed. It is still with us in many senses, and one of these senses is that the paternalistic political culture is still affecting large sections of the society. And by that paternalism, I mean that the expectation of the actors to provide solidarity is usually related to the state and the state institutions. It is usually thought by the actors that it is the state's responsibility, the state's task to provide all sorts of support, that is, to provide the solidarity alone. This is complemented with another aspect of social attitudes, and that is the generally low level of trust in the concrete other and trust in the abstract other, or the generalized other, and trust in the institutions. In international comparisons, it is quite clear that the Hungarian patterns of trust or social capitals are usually below the average compared to the European countries. That results in quite disintegrated or atomized social networks. That's also something which goes back to the state socialist era. This atomization means that generally the primary support networks around the actors is low. Is little. There is not really many people who someone can turn to ask for specific types of support, and that is going to result also in a shortcoming on the level of solidarity as well. And one last aspect which needs to be mentioned is the civil society. The civil society is on the one hand one of the most important projects since the transition. On the other hand, it did not really grow up to those expectations, hopes, and ideas which were attributed to it at the beginning of the transition. Why I'm saying that is that it was not becoming some evident space for social action. Those who are getting involved in the civic organizations or NGOs are usually very well aware of what they are doing and why they are doing it, but it is not something which is just works or comes as a general part of our everyday life. Compared once again to European data sets, we can say that the participation in civil society is still below average. And of course, the recent status of the NGOs in the public sphere was also not very favorable, as they have been targeted by political debates. And that is also something which did not really help the increase of the civil society and the willingness to participate in civil society. Okay, so what can we say based on all these overviews? I would say that the pandemic itself arrived to a late modernity which is already characterized by many contingencies and difficulties of solidarity. A pandemic which is basically, from a sociological perspective, a solidarity challenge. It is about basically increasing the social support for those who are suffering the most from the consequences of the pandemic, which is not just health-related consequences, but which are also material consequences or mental consequences, or the consequences of care working. And all these tasks are basically creating a challenge for solidarity in every society. And we can say that in late modernity, this challenge is already a difficult one, because the whole solidarity system of late modern societies is somehow in a liminal state. It is somehow transforming already. And that's when a crisis is hitting it. And even more so in Hungary, where the solidarity institutions and everyday solidarity ties are characterized by further difficulties, challenges, and discrepancies. So what is happening here is that an impact represented by the pandemic is coming to the solidarity system already in difficult situation. And that was our question, that what is going to happen in this situation? Is it going to be an opportunity for some sort of renewal, some sort of creating new types of solidarity ties, or these kind of things, or rather it is going to be moving towards the direction of creating a solidarity crisis, meaning that those who are suffering are going to suffer more, those who are excluded are going to be excluded even more so. So this is the stake of our research. And let's see, how did we approach to this question? We've been relying on the methodological principle of Bruno Latour, who says that follow the actor. If you would like to understand the social phenomenon, go ahead and take a look at how is it constituted from the perspective of the actors. And that is why we thought that if you would like to understand solidarity and how was it impacted, affected by the pandemic, the best way to do it is to try and map the solidarity interactions, the solidarity ties around the actors from their own perspective. What are those needs they are facing? Health-related, psychological, financial, or care work-related. What are those forms of support they are getting apropos of these needs and necessities? From who does this support come from? From the family member, from the friend, that is the private network, or it's coming from the state, who is the main actor of the solidarity, or it's coming from the civil sector. What are the criticisms towards these support ties? Whether they are satisfied with the support they are being provided, or whether they think of it as highly problematic, for example, because they are not getting the help they need. And that's just one half of the problem. The other half is how are people being engaged in the supporting relations? What sort of support are they providing? What support do they provide for the private sphere around them, their friends, their family members, etc.? And what sort of support do they provide for the wider society, for the generalized other, as it can be said? And that was how we operationalized our research question. And the data set was an online survey. 800 participants were asked about these questions, complemented with background variables. And based on this, we've been trying to create ideal, typical roles in the field of solidarity. And as a method, we've been relying on K-means cluster, which is a statistical method capable of creating patterns along different dimensions. And basically that is what I'm going to introduce in the next table. After that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the social background of these ideal typical positions within the field of solidarity, mostly based on demographical and structural variables. And after that, we are going to take a little bit a look at what are the perspectives of these positions, what sort of attitudes are related to these positions, and that is going to be the third table from now. All right. Basically, we've been differentiating between 5 ideotypical groups or layers of society, if you like it that way. It's easier probably to understand it that way. Or segments of society. The first layer is called the unsupportive deprived group. What is the main characteristic of this group? First of all, this group is characterized by the above average level of problems they are facing as a consequence of the pandemic. They've been mentioning on average at least 2 of these problems, like health, psychological, financial, or care work related problems. So at least 2 of these characterizing them. Also, this group is receiving above average level of support, either from family sources, friends, states, or civil sphere. It is, in their case, it was also at least 1, but usually 2 sources from where they get some support. However, they've been quite often critical with these received supports, which meant that they've been mentioning one or another problem with this support. Either they've been not receiving support which they were needed the most, or they did not really have a word in what is going to or how the supportive interaction could go on. Furthermore, when it came to the question of what support do they provide, it was quite clear that they are not participating either or in private or in public forms of support. They've been not providing, or at least they've been providing support below average level. And here at the total column, you can see the total averages for those who are interested in these numbers of them. So they've been providing support to family and friends and generalized others in a below average ratio. And also they've been not getting too much information about how or what sort of supports are needed by those who are provided. So in this sense, they are characterized by certain asymmetry. This group is certainly on the end of the spectrum, which does not really have, as we will see, does not really have the resources to provide support. So it is stuck in a position where they can only expect and hope for support. And they are getting some of it at least. The second group is an interesting one. It is called the brokers of solidarity. And what is characterizing this group is that on the one hand, they are similar to the unsupported deprived, because they are also need more support than the average of the society. They are facing more problems than the average of the society. They are receiving more support than the average of the society, and they are also more critical towards this support than the average of the society. On the other hand, they are not just receiving support, but they are also providing support for others within their private networks, such as family or friends, or for others in the general public sphere, which includes, for example, civic action or these kinds of things. So in this sense, they are taking a really interesting position within the field of solidarity. They are not just deprived and in need of support, but they are also providing support. They are establishing solidarity ties. They are the brokers of solidarity. They are getting some and giving away some solidarity at the same time. Okay, the next group is called the negligent bystander. Why we call them that way is that because they are completely not taking part in the solidarity field. They are not getting any support, and they are not providing any support either. So in this sense, they are completely somehow stepping out from the sphere of solidarity. They are existing on their own, they are supporting on their own, or ensuring their solidarity needs through other means. The fourth group is a somehow inconsistent pattern once again. Here what we see is the increased need of support, yet that need is not matched with appropriate help. In this sense, they are needing support but not getting that support. On the other hand, they are providing support, especially within the private sphere, or not especially, but mostly in the private sphere. So in this sense, this group is also some sort of asymmetrical social group, in a sense that they are somehow on the losing side of solidarity ties, because they would need more support than they can get, unlike the solidarity brokers. And on the other hand, they are responsible for providing support. And the last group, which has been called the volunteer activists, they are characterized by mostly the very active participation in supporting generalized others. Themselves, they do not really need support. They do not really provide support for their friends or family members. They are rather focusing on participating in civil society voluntary activism. They are the best informed, and they are participating on the higher numbers in these activities according to our results. Now let's see a little bit the social background of these groups. What we see is basically, and I'm going to focus now on the structural constituents, because the demographical ones were not that really decisive, although they are also adding some element. But what's important here is that in case of the first ideotypical group, the unsupportive deprived, we see a clear structural disadvantageous position, both on the level of incomes, that is material capital, both on the level of cultural capital, both on the level of experiencing some form of discrimination, of exclusion, both on the level of labor market. They are either in unemployed or in precarious job positions. They are in a precarious position. The brokers of solidarity are, however, showing a different pattern, a more inconsistent one, if you like. From cultural capital perspective, they are also below average. However, and also they are also experiencing discrimination or exclusion more often than the average. They are also working in precarious sectors. However, they are above average position when it comes to the income situation. The negligent bystanders and the voluntary activists are quite similar concerning their structural position. They are both above average concerning material and cultural capitals. The difference between them is basically their job positions are also secure. The difference between them is basically the experience of discrimination or exclusion. While the negligent bystanders do not refer to these sort of experiences, the voluntary activist does. So they have some sort of experience of suffering, which is, on the other hand, not paired with structural disadvantages, which will enable them to act upon these experiences of suffering. The private supporters are quite similar when it comes to structural background to the brokers of solidarity. The main difference between the two is that partly due to the demographical differences, these groups are a higher than average level of women, unlike the brokers who are mostly male. But here the unemployment ratios are higher. Now, when it comes to political positions of these groups, that's also very interesting. That while the unsupportive, deprived group are mostly inactive when it comes to political preferences or decisions, the brokers of solidarity and the volunteer activists are the most active, and here we see a left-wing, right-wing divide, and the negligent bystanders are also mostly inactive and indifferent when it comes to political preferences, and the private supporters are also mostly on the politically less active side of the spectrum. Finally, let's see a few attitudes, and that is going to lead to the concluding table, so there is just a few minutes left. When it comes to well-being, it's not surprising the pattern. The unsupportive, deprived are basically below average, and similarly to the brokers of solidarity, due to their experiences of deprivation. The negligent bystanders and the voluntary activists are above average when it comes to personal well-being. When it comes to trust, we see that those who are going to be active in supporting, they are having above average level, while those who are going to be inactive in providing support, they are going to have below average level of trust in the others. And the same goes for trust in institutions as well. When it comes to the general evaluation of the pandemics, what we see is a more pessimistic and fatalistic attitude setting in case of unsupported deprived. We see a more or less skeptic approach to how the pandemic will turn out after a year for the brokers of solidarity, and also partly for the private supporters. We are seeing more or less satisfied and more paternalism-based satisfaction in case of the negligent bystander, and we are seeing a more or less hopeful, promising prospect that we can manage it, we can overcome it attitude in case of the voluntary activists. And that also impacts the attributed responsibilities. In case of unsupported deprived, there is a negative pattern of responsibility. They do not really expect much help. That is obviously related to their lack of being provided support. The brokers of solidarity and the activists, they are believing strongly in the civil cooperation, the civil force, which has been proven by many activists during the first wave of the pandemic. And the negligent bystander and the private supporters are mostly relying on the state. Okay, now let's sum it up a little bit, wrap it up. What are the main conclusions? When it comes to taking a look at the size, the sheer size of these groups, it is quite shocking in a certain way that the two largest groups are negligent bystanders and unsupported deprived. They constitute the 2/3 of our sample, which means that they are such a massive population in our sample, and of course this cannot be directly applied to the whole population, but we can make the strong hypothesis that on the level of the society, not drastically different frequencies would be found. So this means that there is a really big group in the society which is either because of they do not have the resources, or because they are not taking part in the solidarity field due to their paternalism, are not going to provide any sort of support. Those, however, who are active in this sense, on the one hand, they are themselves quite heavily affected by the pandemic in sense of being in precarious positions. So their resources are also depleting as the pandemic goes on, which means that the size of those who can provide support directly in the society is shrinking. as the pandemic evolves. And this means that according to our results, the pandemic was creating even more, on statistical level, the pandemic was creating even more difficulties on the level of solidarity in a field which has been already characterized by many difficulties and shortcomings. And to conclude, I would say that in this situation, it is particularly important how the state can and will act after the second and third wave of the pandemic, because there are not really big supplies of solidarity on the level of everyday interactions, and that is without direct interventions, state programs and social security interventions, there is a really big risk of a solidarity crisis to come. That is, large sections of the societies will have the experience of being left on their own with all those problems and challenges which the pandemic provided. And the consequences of these experiences is obviously quite stark. Okay, so that's it in the first round, and thank you for your attention, and looking for your questions, comments, remarks.
Thank you very much for the very interesting and informative lecture, Professor Sik. And now we would like to give the floor to the audience for questions, which can be put to the chat, and then we can show the questions on the screen. But while participants are thinking, I would have a question which is, I know, comes from a bit different direction, because from my professional background, I'm from philosophy. My relation with sociology is that I wrote my PhD thesis on Max Weber's study on China, Confucianism and Taoism, and my question is in accordance with that, a bit theoretical, and that is, how could we, or could we, I really very cautious with this question, could we say that if we do the same research, what was done now for Hungary, we would do this for Austria, Germany, other Western European countries, and we would do the same, for example, in China or India, countries which are now very much affected by the pandemics, we could see some, let's say, patterns, differences, or we could see the same differences between Hungary and Austria as we could say between Germany and China. So it absolutely doesn't depend on any kind of cultural and regions and maybe traditions. So are there any traditions of solidarity which we could see?
Yes, that's a really good question, and of course, I'm not in the position of providing an elaborated answer to this question, because that would require comparative studies. But I can highlight still some levels where I'm quite sure there are differences and fundamental differences. If we go back a little bit to one of the previous tables, where I've been talking a little bit about the late modern context, here it's quite obvious that globally there are quite different constellations emerging in countries like China or India, and there are quite big differences even within the EU states like Hungary or Austria. Here, obviously, the social historical background matters a lot, and in this sense, Hungary is going, of course, with the Central and Eastern European countries, which has been sharing the state socialist years, and that state socialist era has also been producing a lot of differences, but a lot of similarities. And one important aspect of this was, and that's already discussed a lot by Eötvös Loránd, his studies back in the 70s and 80s. I also mentioning him here as well, that the state socialist years has been quite devastating for the solidarity ties of the everyday interactions. Why? First of all, because of these really strong paternalistic state policies were being applied. Secondly, there was a really strong materialistic individualization processes going on the level of the values. Thirdly, because there was a really strong atomizing impact on the social networks, and overall, this meant that the majority of the society was relating to the questions of solidarity as if they were not really their own business. That is what the negligent bystanders are about. They are 42% in the sample, which means that that's a massive group, and this is quite strongly related to the state socialist heritage, I think, in a cultural sense. Now, how it is in India or China, there are obviously completely different structural backgrounds, transformations, and as a consequence, I would say that there are different state institutions, and in this sense, there are quite a lot of differences of what is to be expected from the state, what is the historical imagination of what is to be expected from the state, or what is to be expected from the other, from my neighbor, from my family members. And these are also changing a lot due to the late modernity. Nowadays, what's happening as a consequence of global capitalism, it is quite distortive for many solidarity ties, both on the level of state security, social security institutions, and both on the level of private networks of solidarity. So these elements are adding up, and the local social historical background and the contemporary structural global impacts are creating different compounds in these constellations. I'm pretty sure that is why we can say with certainty that if we would take a look at the Austrian, the German, not to mention the Chinese and the Indian patterns, we would find quite different patterns if a similar survey were made there.
Thank you very much. Meanwhile, I don't see questions from the audience yet. Maybe I have another one, if I may. Because now you were mentioning traditions and the effect of certain regimes or historical political eras on certain social attitudes. Do we have any kind of methods to go back, let's say 70, 80, 100 years to the time when there were no such surveys in any societies, to have a picture about the changes in such attitudes on the longer period?
Yeah, when it comes to, let's stick with the Hungarian context, these sorts of attitude surveys, since the 70s, they are available, of course, with different, they've been starting to do this at that time. But these surveys are not the only way to get a picture of these relations, and here obviously there is a really massive research from social historians who are especially in the ELTE there is a big atelier community who are working in the French tradition of analysis. Social historical school, and there are quite a lot of ways to reconstruct how these ties were operating at that time. Even if there are no surveys, there are many statistics which are going back to much older times, and those statistics can be interpreted quite creatively. Also, there are sources like descriptions of the everyday life, which helps a lot to create a picture about how these needs and necessities were managed, by whom, with what methods and mechanisms, and according to what norms and values. So I would say yes, there is a chance for that, and I'm pretty sure. The book I mentioned, Robert Kastel, The Transformation of a Social Question, is going back to the medieval times, where there are obviously no statistics, but there are other sorts of resources which can be used for this purpose.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at the wall, and I see there are no questions there yet. Maybe a last one from my side. It's really just not so closely related to the present topic, but rather in general, in terms of your attitude as a researcher when you are doing researches of this kind. Are you thinking about your position in society, or you must be absolutely out of this context when you are trying to look at it as a researcher?
Well,
and I'm asking this, of course, from the Weberian perspective of objectivity and value freedom, and
as you'll be mentioning it in the introduction, I am very much coming from a critical theoretical tradition, and it's it's not a secret that if someone is doing a research on solidarity, it involves some sort of wish that the solidarity ties, which are burdened with so many dysfunctionalities and challenges, as I've been referring to, they could and should be improved in one way or another. However, when it comes to, so that is concerning my background. However, when it comes to doing the research, it's just the way, as Weber wrote, that after clarifying one's positions in this sense and value choices, that after that there is no real opportunity for mixing the levels of Sein and Sollen, that is saying that, okay, this and this should be. As a researcher, I cannot really say that. What I can say is providing descriptions. What are the ideal typical positions in the societies? What are their background? And I think that for someone who is in a policy-making position, these data can be quite useful if they want to improve or intervene in the solidarity times. If they want to make targeted interventions, I think these contextual analyses help a lot of what are the different needs in different positions of the society when it comes to solidarity.
Thank you very much for your detailed answers. And if there are no questions, I would like to thank you again for this very informative lecture. And I would like to thank all participants for joining our second lecture of the What's New in Science series, the second event of the ELTE Alumni Academy. Be sure to join us next time. That will be the 23rd of June, 4 p.m. Lecture held by Dr. Robert Urban, professor at the Institute of Psychology at ELTE's Faculty of Education and Psychology. And if you are an alumnus of ELTE, please don't forget to join the university's alumni community at alumni.elte.hu, where of course you can find articles, stay informed about events, and find opportunities, and join groups, make connections with alumni of the university. ELTE Alumni welcomes you back. Thank you very much again, and I wish you a nice afternoon, evening.
Thank you, Ferenc. I would like to thank also for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.
And for the attention of everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.